joining us right now. It's pretty good when your first book out with Bob Woodward, Peril, launches at #1 in the New York Times bestseller. Robert Costa, of course, legendary at the Washington Post, has wandered over to any number of jobs and, of course, joins us now this morning with CBS and Face the Nation. Robert Costa, within the frenzy in your world right now, you are a calm voice. Who are you listening to into the weekend? Which kind of source are you listening to?
I'm listening to people who really know President Biden, not just top Democrats, not just House Democrats and Senate Democrats who are on the outer perimeter of Biden's circle. People who really know this guy, who was elected to the Senate in 1972, who has been through public humiliation and public loss for a long time. And they're telling me behind the scenes that he wants to stay in this race. He's telling people close to him and family members he's adamant he should be the nominee, right, and he's best positioned to beat Trump. But that doesn't mean it's quieting Democrats.
You're the only one I could say this to. I mean, when he was in high school, prep school, Costa was booking the beautiful people of Hollywood to play his prep school. I mean, he's on a first-name basis at 16 with Maroon 5. What is that about? Robert Costa on the Democratic Party donor class. Who are these guys, to take it from Butch Cassidy?
Well, you have people like Jeffrey Katzenberg around President Biden, Hollywood moguls. They just had the big Hollywood fundraiser for Biden a few weeks ago. And they're so motivated not by putting Biden in the presidency again, but by stopping Trump. And that dynamic has to be noted as this all plows ahead in the days to come, because it's really about stopping Trump for a lot of these donors and Democrats, not giving Biden a second term. And that's so than past presidential cycles.
And so, Robert, how do you guys set this up for Face the Nation this Sunday morning on the CBS television network?
So I'm lucky enough to be guest anchor this weekend, and we're going to talk to Jim Clyburn. And I think he's really important because he actually has political capital. A lot of people claim to have political capital. He actually has it. He made Biden the nominee in 20 with his endorsement. Where is he going to stand? Parse his words carefully and listen to what he has to say. What's notable is that Clyburn's been talking publicly about maybe backing Vice President Harris if Biden steps away. Does Clyburn start to really escalate that talk or not? We also have Senator Bernie Sanders. What's he going to do if Biden steps away? He's always wanted the presidency. He's 82. Does he run? Does he back Harris? Where does the progressive, the left wing, do they stick with the Biden pick or the Harris pick or not?
Right.
We're in a very fluid and fragile moment.
I mean, Robert Costa, I can see you doing a Dan Rather imitation on the floor in Chicago, like 1968. I mean, how close are we, Robert Costa, within CBS reporting to not the certitude of a migration from the president to the vice president, but an actual cohesive debate or sets of dialogue to get to a selection choice for president and vice president in Chicago?
What's stunning to me is how this kind of corporate culture has fallen over the Democratic Party, that so few people want to take any kind of risk publicly. And politics used to be about risk. As you noted, you had conventions that were rough and tumble. People wanted power. You had to fight for it. Democrats are averse, it seems, to political war. And at this point, it seems like Harris would be the logical choice for a lot of them to avoid it. They would think maybe she loses, maybe she wins, but they would look ahead to 2028. But look, in presidential politics, I've only covered it for 15 years. You only have one shot most of the time. And this is a rare opening for somebody maybe to step into the vacuum. So I expect somebody to maybe give Harris a run.
Interesting. Rob, this is great. Robert Costa, thank you so much. In for Margaret Brennan. Face the Nation Sunday on radio at 2 on Bloomberg. We now turn to someone, Costa's a young buck, 15 years in.
Yeah.
Flip the numbers. Joe Mathieu's been doing this for 51 years and joins us with Balance of Power as well. Joe, I'm sure you remember a given election in the cold and slush. Maybe it was a primary. I think it was William Weld, Ted Kennedy in Boston. I can't remember, but it was rough and tumble politics. People were swearing at Durgan Park, trying to get a dinner. And I mean, it was the way it used to be. And a lot of idiots like me want the romance of 1968, or rough and tumble Tip O'Neill politics of Boston. Am I delusional to look forward to that?
We all do. Every 4 years, what a contested convention is like Christmas morning for a political reporter, and then it never happens. I will remind you, they've now auctioned off all of the restaurant equipment from Durgan Park. It doesn't exist anymore, and I don't know if there's a high rent condo there or something now, but much like the politics you describe, I'm not sure they're going to recreate it. And there's a real worry that if that's where we're going here, that this will be so disruptive that it's exactly what Donald Trump is hoping for. But I don't know. They've set up a week-long obstacle course for Joe Biden, and let's see if he can clear it.
I mean, what's important here to understand, I get a surveillance correction here. Joe Mathieu never darkened the door at Durgan Park. He was over at Lockover having the chilled oyster soup under a portrait that made you blush when you were 10 years old. Paul.
Hey, Joe.
You can't get corned beef at Lockover.
That would be true.
Joe, what's the realistic time frame here for President Biden to make a decision here? How do we think about that?
It's a great question. They seem to have carved out a week. It starts today with the interview being deemed as the most important interview of his political life. And boy, that's going to be interesting. I'm really curious to see how much time he commits to this, if it's 15 minutes or if it's 45 minutes. That's going to tell us a lot. But he's going to be speaking in Wisconsin, albeit with a teleprompter. He's got NATO next week. He's got a trip to Philadelphia as well. But NATO, I want to just go ahead past the interview today. Think about the stakes of that solo news conference he's going to hold to conclude NATO. That's not a bilateral. He's not going to have Volodymyr Zelensky sitting next to him. It's not going to be 2-2 for the reporters. This is the big one. This is the big slog. He's never done this East Room primetime news conference thing that his predecessors were pretty good at. And so is he going to be able to take the Skip Gates question 45 minutes into that exercise? Because they're going to be throwing curveballs at him in real time. He's going to be tired after all the meetings. And I'm thinking next week, that news conference is the most important thing on his schedule.
Are the Democrats, to the extent that he does decide to step back here, is there a accepted process from where the party would go from there, or is it we haven't gotten to that point yet?
No. We haven't gotten to that point, but I do find it interesting that over the past couple of days, the narrative has really turned us back to Kamala Harris and away from this idea of Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom or somebody popping in. Look, there's a reason why she's there. There's a reason why he picked her, and I don't think you're going to find a lot of people who want to run against, frankly, somebody who could make history as the first black female president. If you're teeing up yourself for 28, you're not running against her now.
Joe, quickly here, do you observe any polls? I mean, let's be clear here, folks. Matthew's encyclopedic on this. Are there polls that support Vice President Harris becoming President Harris?
Well, look, her favorability rating in our own Bloomberg swing state poll with Morning Consult was on the rise and, in fact, higher than Joe Biden's in the last turn. But CNN ran numbers and found her in a statistical tie with Donald Trump. We all say that Joe Biden might be the only person who can beat him. This challenges that, and she's stronger than Biden with women and with independents. Imagine a ticket where she's got maybe a Democratic governor like a Shapiro or a Roy Cooper with her, and she's got the mantle of abortion, the moral clarity on that issue, and potentially could make history as the first black female president. That's a story that Democrats can get their heads around. Throwing all the pieces up in the air and doing a mini primary like they're talking about, a series of 5 debates with people who have no name recognition, sounds dangerous.
Joe Mathieu, thank you so much. Balance of power. That's what this is about, folks. Robert Costa, Joe Mathieu, back to back. Terry Haines joins us now to pick up the pieces and piece together, I guess, the second week of July in Washington. I don't know if he's capable of doing that. Terry Haines with Pangaea joins us. Terry, right now, after the bizarreness of this weekend, the uniqueness in American history, what is the Terry Haines unknown?
Well, very simply, it's whether Biden's up to the job or not, and whether he can prove it or not. I mean, we've been as citizens have been misinformed about the president's condition, to put it kindly, and much of the news media, not this network, but much of the news media has willfully ignored it. Now they're overcompensating. The question is whether he's up to it or not. I mean, I wouldn't put a lot of money on it in Vegas, but at the same time, you've had situations where he's gone out in public a few times and shown fire and shown the ability to talk. And he's got Stephanopoulos coming up tonight, and that's going to be a huge moment for the campaign.
And we'll have to see that. Bloomberg, of course, will be synthesizing the questions, edited and unedited, at ABC. Terry, excuse me, choking on a fifth hot dog. I didn't do Nathan's, but I got up to 5 hot dogs. What can I say? Terry Haines, what is the probability, the likelihood, the ability of the Democratic Party to squeeze into X number of weeks a diverse campaign process of 4, 5, 6, 7 candidates to get to a smoke-filled convention?
Oh, by which you mean replace Biden? Is that where we're going?
Yeah, well, replace Biden, but to go beyond just the idea the vice president will take over.
Yeah, well, it depends on whether we're talking about him leaving the presidency or leaving his candidacy, or both. And that's a little more finely judged than I think he probably wanted. But the answer is, they can absolutely get a situation where this virtual nomination process they're going to try to pull in a couple of weeks, might get short-circuited by a number of the delegates themselves who may well insist on a rewriting of the rules. There's an awful lot of dissatisfaction out there, but there's not a lot of ability by those who are most dissatisfied with being able to do something about it. This is still pretty tightly controlled, and I think Biden's trying to brazen it out right now.
So, Terry, it's really up to President Biden where this whole thing goes here. What's your sense of timing? When do you think the president really has to make a decision of whether he is in it or not?
Probably between now, almost certainly, Paul, between now and the convention in mid-August. But then there's this tripwire where the virtual convention happens in sometime in mid-July, late July. So, what they're trying to do right now is, we're going to wrap up the party regulars, make it all but impossible for the convention itself to remove him, which makes it even more in his judgment about whether he wants to continue or not.
And Terry, I guess the question for a lot of folks within the Democratic Party is, if he were to say, I'm going to step aside for this next election, is there any sense of what the process might be? Would there be a series of debates among party leaders? Would it just be handed to Vice President Harris? How would it work out, do you think?
Well, I think there's a group that wants it handed to Harris. But Biden, of course, is using Harris, I think, as a backstop for his own ambitions to stay. I think what ends up happening is you have a change to the party rules that releases delegates from their first ballot commitment to Biden, and you actually have, as we had before 1972, actually have an open convention where the delegates actually get to decide who they want. And in that situation, you'd have nominations by different people, you'd have speeches, you'd have unruliness galore, just like you used to have in American politics.
This is, obviously, the media, that's exciting. We're talking our book, which is We Want a Crazy Convention. But Terry Haines, I want you to take us right now to 430 South Capitol Street Southeast, Washington, D.C., to the headquarters of the Democratic National Party, I guess. Jamie Harrison, Chris Cork, Jason Ray, and others. Does the president routinely, any Democratic president, do they just control the DNC? Or does the DNC have a vote to get to that convention we all want?
They control the DNC, particularly in the months and year leading up to the election. That's been standard in both parties for quite a while. And when you combine that with the fact that the parties, as party organizations, have been atrophying over the past several decades. It's interesting to talk about it today because I'm sitting in London. You've just had conversations about the UK elections. The party organizations are very strong in the UK, whereas they're very weak in the United States, and nowhere weaker or nowhen weaker than the year of a presidential election. So Jamie Harrison's taking orders from the White House.
To sum this up, to Paul's good question, the president of the United States really is going to decide the process of his future and his party's future in the coming days and weeks, maybe to get to a Donnybrook that gets us to Chicago. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. They've exercised huge control over this process from day one. Basically making it a primary free process. Exercising a grip on the party controls, exercising a grip on the money, as people are now starting to figure out. The money gets the Biden-Harris money gets dispersed away unless it's anybody but Biden or Harris at the top of the ticket. So there's a lot of considerations mechanical for Democrats to go through, much less the fundamental question of whether Biden ought to be their nominee and whether he ought to remain as president.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.